I watched the new documentary on Netflix produced by Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, called Sean Combs The Reckoning. This is all about Sean Puffy, P. Diddy Combs, and what led to the huge trial that happened this year and the scandal that went on, and sort of the entire story of the history of this man and sort of what he's done in the in the music industry, not necessarily the good things he's done, really, although it does cover things like that. This documentary is 4 parts right now. It's on Netflix. Each part's about an hour long. I managed to watch all 4 parts, and I'm going to give you sort of my rundown and my review of what I thought. First of all, it's a very well directed documentary. It's a very well put together documentary and edited. And what I find most fascinating about this documentary is the footage they have, the candid behind the scenes footage they have of Diddy talking to his lawyers and talking to his friends during the time of the scandal, literally right before he got arrested. The fact that they got this footage makes me wonder legitimately if somebody in Diddy's inner circle decided to just go ahead and betray him, or maybe he mistreated them. I will tell you that a lot of people were interviewed for this from Diddy's inner circle. People like Kurt Burrows were interviewed, somebody who, if you've been keeping up with this through interviews like on Vlad TV with Gene Deal and guys like that, it should be no surprise. They interview witnesses to a lot of what he did. They interview his assistant, Capricorn Clark, who was part of the trial, and many, many others as well. So I want to say this. When it comes to the story of the history of Diddy and Bad Boy, this doesn't talk too much about the record label, but that is obviously a big part of it because it all ties back to that. Earlier this year, Diddy was in trial for RICO, which is basically the law that was created to take out the mafia. And he was found not guilty on that, but he was found guilty on 2 other counts. And from the beginning, a lot of people criticized the federal government for trying to get him on RICO, and their case for him being, basically a mobster, for lack of a better term, was not on solid ground. It was more of a domestic violence case against Cassie than anything else. However, I will tell you that a lot of the things that Diddy did, especially when it comes to literally committing arson on Kid Cudi's car, things like that, not to mention weapons trafficking. This is all mafia stuff, and the federal government failed to make that a part of the case. They kept focusing on Cassie, and I think that's why they lost. I think that's ultimately why they lost the RICO part of the case. What this documentary seeks out to do, it's not really one that focuses too much on the legal. That's saved for maybe the last 30 or so minutes of the documentary of part 4. There's 4 parts. This documentary is supposed to tell you that this behavior from Diddy, this shocking behavior, like the footage where he beat up Cassie in the hotel room, this behavior is nothing new, and that it actually goes back, way back to his early years in the music industry. And the story here is that whether you call it karma or whether you call it just him bringing negative energy to himself by being the kind of person he was, tragedy and violence has followed Diddy going back his entire career. And they do talk a little bit about his relationship with his mother, which is, really strange in some instances. And it shows how somebody like this can sort of be created, nurtured, that is to say. Now, if you're looking for them to go into the real salacious stuff, which is the rumors of Diddy and Usher and Diddy and Justin Bieber, and the rumors of, Diddy having underage relations, let's put it that way, with them, that's not really talked about all that much. And to be honest, I'm more curious about that because to me, that's what people I think are really curious about, if this guy actually did mess around with, underage, individuals, because that changes everything. It makes it 10 times worse. That's not really covered on here. And to be frank with you, if you are familiar with this story. Like if you've been following the Diddy story, much of this documentary is not going to shock you whatsoever. They talk about the infamous New York basketball game when with the riots happened. They talk about the deaths of Biggie and Tupac and how Puffy was tied into those. It doesn't straight up tell you that he was involved in them, except for, of course, the discussion behind him and Keefe D, which was covered in Greg Kading's investigation. If you want more information on the Greg Kading story, he is on this documentary. There's a book he put out called Murder Rap, and it talks about what led to the death of Tupac Shakur in Vegas, and Diddy basically writing a check for $1 million and giving it to his friend Zip, who was supposed to give it to Keefe D for the murder. It never happened. He never got paid, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Orlando Anderson is the nephew of Keefe D. That's the guy who got beaten up at the MGM Grand Garden Arena the night that Pac got killed. And the death of Tupac came because Orlando Anderson felt like he couldn't go back to LA with the reputation that an actor, a rapper, beat him up. Because you have to understand, Orlando Anderson is a legitimate street like killer. Like this guy's got a body count. He's not a rapper who goes around saying he's done things. He's actually done things. And Tupac should not have done what he did jumping into that skirmish, and maybe he'd be alive today. However, Keefe D did get paid, or he didn't get paid. He was supposed to get paid by Puff. All of that is covered in this documentary. But, I think some people might have got the wrong idea and thought that it was an actual hit. But in reality, it was Orlando Anderson getting retaliation, and Keefe D thought he'd kill two birds with one stone and get paid by it. And that they go into everything here. They play some of the Keefe D tape. They actually, Greg Kading talks about it. It's all here. It's all here. But many of you are already familiar with that story. If you are, then you know what to expect. I know a lot of folks aren't, but I will tell you this: the murder of Tupac and who killed him has been common knowledge in hip hop circles for decades. I mean, I was deep into hip hop in the 2000s, and I remember hearing that even back then. That everybody knew, just nobody said anything, that it was Orlando Anderson that did it. It still remains unsolved now by the Las Vegas Police Department, but we know that that's what happened. So they talk about that. They talk about the freak offs. They talk about the different opinions behind it. They talk about how he took over Bad Boy, the Steve Stout situation where he beat him up with he smashed a bottle over his head or something like that back, in like the late 90s because of that Nas video. All of that is covered. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're listening to this review and you're like, what the hell, like, can you tell me more about this? I could, but it's in the documentary. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you should watch this documentary because you will learn about it. I'm just saying that people that were in rap circles and music circles and who followed this story, they know already all of this, right? So if you're already familiar with this, you're not going to get that many big revelations. The most interesting thing is Diddy, of course, being, like the candid footage of him talking to his lawyers. That to me was the most interesting thing. The documentary didn't really pop out any big surprises whatsoever, in my view. Like most of the stuff they talked about, I knew, but I also was pretty knee deep in this story because I was a fan. Biggie's still one of my favorite rappers of all time. Puffy's early work I enjoyed. I enjoyed making the band. Like, I was a fan of this guy. Not a hardcore fan because I didn't think he's not really a good rapper. And the documentary does talk about how he can't write rhymes. He has other people write them for him, which has always been the case. But he knew how to put out a hit. He's always known how to put out like popular music that's gonna bang in the radio stations, and there you go. So the first part of the documentary does talk about the establishment of Bad Boy Records, and then the second part goes into Biggie. The third part talks a bit about the Jennifer Lopez situation and the Shine Club shooting. As you can see, there's a pattern here. Violence has followed this man, and because of his money, his power, and his influence, he's been able to get lawyers to protect him. It's the age-old story. I talked about it in my review for the OJ documentary I did on this channel a while ago, that when you're wealthy, you can get away with anything. If you're rich, you can get away with anything, man. They are above the law in many cases because they have the best lawyers who are able to create that reasonable doubt to get them out of being in trouble. And this is no exception. I mean, Diddy's done a lot of horrible things, and yeah, he's doing time right now, but maybe he's not doing the amount of time that some feel he should do. I leave that up to you. So when it comes to editing, and if you're unfamiliar with this, you will be captivated by a lot of this documentary. I assure you of that. If you know the players and you know the story, it's a well edited summary that I think did a good job of telling us that this guy Diddy has always had problems following him. I mean, I used to talk about the bad boy curse, and others talked about it after I did, about how all these acts, all of these I guess you can call them artists. Yeah, all these artists on Bad Boy, something bad ends up happening to them. Whether it be Shine, Biggie, Mace, Loon, people don't last on that label. And they do interview people who either were rappers on that label or who worked for that label in this documentary. So you're going to get a nice picture of everything. So yeah, it's on Netflix right now. Sean Combs, The Reckoning. Check it out, and I'll catch you in the next one.